Welcome to another Pirkei Avot text exploration. We are now into the eighth, I believe. The eighth text in the second chapter. What we're going to see now is, I'm just going to kick it off. Rabba Yohan ben Zakkai received it from Hillel and Shammai. Now this receiving from these various pairs was a theme throughout, almost like an organizing structure to the first chapter of Pirkei Avot. And here it has echoes of that, right? Hillel and Shammai were the last pair that we read of receiving whatever it was transmitted from a previous pair. Here, however, instead of a pair receiving it, it's just one. Just Rabba Yohan ben Zakkai. And this really then changes, it shifts, because this is the final time we see in Pirkei Avot of this reception of whatever it was, a mantle of leadership, some sense of Torah, whatever it was, it's unclear, it's unspecified. We already have a sense that this is different than whatever we have encountered from before, because it is not a pair receiving from another pair. So he receives this from Hillel and Shammai, and he used to say, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai used to say, so it was a common saying or phrase of his, if you have learned much Torah, do not claim credit for yourself, because for such a purpose were you created. Now, this is interesting. We have been seeing a trend of really valorizing Torah. It is a high value here in Pirkei Avot, which is really interesting what we see here. If you've learned much Torah, and we have seen learning a lot of Torah is a good thing. It is a positive value as it is being articulated here in Pirkei Avot. But he says, do not claim credit for yourself, because that's why you were created. It's a really interesting thing. Don't think al tachazik tova liatzmecha ki lechach nozarta. Okay, that's just what you were created to do. It's an interesting perspective for sure. Clearly, he's saying this in response to people who clearly are feeling great about having learned a lot of Torah, having studied a lot of Torah. I don't know. It's fascinating because the Hebrew is al tachazik tova liatzmecha. Don't ascribe. Don't take in so much good for yourself. Don't take so much good for yourself. I'll be honest. It's really tough. It's really tough to read this because on the one hand, yes, this is talking about humility. He is saying, be humble about this. Don't think this is over and above what you, like anybody, is here for. This is what everybody really should be doing. Everybody should be learning Torah. Everybody should be studying Torah. Which clearly that's not the case. Most Jews don't even study so much Torah, and let alone those who are. It's just, I don't know. I have issues with it clearly, but it is certainly advocating for humility when learning Torah. Don't think you're so great because you've studied and learned so much Torah, he is saying. Don't try to aggrandize yourself over other people. It's an interesting saying. Okay. Now we're going to go on in this text, which is actually quite lengthy. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 disciples, and these were they. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah, Rabbi Yossi the priest, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. Those are the 5. Now, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai used to list their outstanding virtues. So here he is describing, he clearly has a sense of what characteristics they bring to the table and what distinguishes and differentiates them. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is a plastered cistern which loses not a drop, meaning he learns things and just everything stays with him. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah, happy is the woman that gave birth to him. So clearly an upstanding person, a good person. Rabbi Yossi the priest is a pious man. Okay, he's pious. Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel is one that fears sin. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. And Rabbi Elazar ben Arach is like a spring that ever gathers force. It's a continually flowing spring, a lot of energy. And whether that's a physical energy, a mental energy, an emotional energy, it's unclear. But it's a really cool visual of that spring, that ever-flowing spring, as it were. Okay. Mein Hamit Gaber. Yeah, it's a strengthening. It's a continually strengthening spring. Okay. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai used to say. Now here's another used to say. If all of the sages of Israel were on one side of the balance, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus on the other scale, he would outweigh them all. Meaning, he was such an incredible intellect, and clearly, as he pointed out, such an incredible memory. He lost nothing. Everything that came in, he retained. He kept it. And that's really important. According to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he would outweigh them all. He was just, it wasn't even just that he was better. It was that even collectively, no one could even compare to him. What's really fascinating is that it's not the end of this text. We get one more line. Abba Shaul said from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's name, if all the sages of Israel were on one scale of the balance, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus with them, and then Rabbi Elazar ben Arach on the other side, he would outweigh them all. That's an interesting take. The tradition we have just straight from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is to say Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is the best of his time, and then we have this alternative opinion or an alternative remembrance or history of it, which is Abba Shaul said no. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai actually said it was Rabbi Elazar ben Arach that would be able to outweigh them. Okay, it's an interesting alternative take. It's interesting the way that we see this play out ultimately throughout rabbinic literature, because what we see, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach really is not a major figure. He does not appear all that much really in rabbinic literature, whereas Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus actually appears quite frequently, especially in the key rabbinic text of the Mishnah, as well as the related text, the Tosefta. He is one of the top 10 most frequently mentioned rabbis in those two bodies of literature. So he becomes a really significant figure within the rabbinic movement. And just to provide some chronological context to what's going on here, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is a bridge. So Hillel and Shammai, that we had read at the top of this text, from whom Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai received whatever it was from them, Hillel and Shammai are living there towards the end of the Second Temple period. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is a bridge from the Second Temple era to the post-destruction era, and this is all taking place in the latter part of the first century of the Common Era. And these sages, including Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananiah, and the other few, they are living in the latter part of this first century, and they certainly must have lived I imagine they lived during towards the end days, as it were, of the Second Temple, but certainly they were the sages, the top sages in the post-destruction era, and probably, who knows, maybe the turn of the second century. So these sages, as we'll see, we'll hear from more in future such discussions. So it's an interesting bridging of eras, as we see, and we'll continue on in the future. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching.